Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopath Fiona Chin, co-founder of Kidney Coach and our supplement range Ketosis, designed to support people diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. And I'm really excited by my guest today. He's a first-timer on our podcast, the amazing Felix Mueller. Felix is all the way from Germany, my first German guest. And Felix has a really great story. He is the author of Reversing Polycystic Kidney Disease. Felix himself has PKD and I'll let him tell you all about his journey, but I assume from his journey, he became a health coach. He works one-on-one with patients, and he was the original discoverer of the effects of a ketogenic diet and the effect it has in PKD. Don't be fooled by anyone else trying to claim that one. That is all Felix's. So Felix, I'm really excited to have you on. We have a lot of people in the community with PKD, and being genetic, a lot of people think that really they're waiting for a kidney transplant and scrambling along the way to try and slow it down with things. And I'm wondering, maybe or maybe not, that doesn't have to be the case. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about all things PKD. I know people will be really interested in what you see when you implement a ketogenic diet, and anything else that you think our listeners want to know when it comes to PKD.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. I think it's something that needs to be heard by a lot more people. We do have some kind of Facebook community, but still, I mean, we're like, 6,000 people. And if you count other groups to this, maybe we have like 10,000 people worldwide that are really aware of this type of approach to PKD.
Wow.
And you contrast that with, we think it's like 12 million worldwide that have it. So that's a very, very small percentage of people that know about it. So, but yeah, I think we're making progress. And yeah, I think it all comes down to the things that we learned about the mutation itself in PKD that have only surfaced maybe, like 10, 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that is when I was sort of by accident made aware of all this science, because I was very lucky in that I just happened to do a ketogenic diet for other reasons. Yeah. And then I was very diligent about it, and I did this version of it called the Bulletproof diet, which I do to this day. It's ketogenic, but we also remove some of the anti-nutrient rich vegetables, emphasizing the other vegetables. So it's really a vegetable rich diet, but it's without some of the oxalates, lectins, phytic acids, so things that can make other problems in the body worse. So it's a very clean, sort of organic type of ketogenic diet. We have some red meat, we have some vegetables, we have some fat. And I was doing that in 2015, 2014. And I just, happened to get to my nephrologist and find out that in the ultrasound, it looked like the kidneys had gotten smaller and we had better GFR, so kidney function on the blood test. And I just asked the guy if we could confirm that via MRI, because he said, ultrasound is not that accurate. It might not be anything. And then I said, well, okay, cool. Can we do MRI? He said, yeah, sure. That's the gold standard. So let's do MRI. It did take some time for me to actually get it approved and everything, but we finally ended up doing it. And we then confirmed that it was a 7% reduction after I went on this diet, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you contrast that again with continuous growth, you would expect like about 3% per year going up. And it was within 3 years going down 7%. So that's almost that's the same amount that it would have gone up.
Yeah, about 28%.
Yeah, you should have expected +9 or something, but you got -7. So that's a pretty big delta difference. And funnily enough, nephrologists, they are so hard to convince that anything has happened.
I know.
Yeah, you will know, yes.
Yeah.
So of course, the next thing he said, well, MRI is not that reliable.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I abandoned the thought that he might ever understand what's happening, but that's fine. So I took that as the opportunity to look for research that could explain that. And at that point, I wasn't even sure like what it was about the diet. Like it could have been any factor. But then I found this paper like in I think it was from 2015. It might have been 2013. That the mutated cells in PKD exhibited what's called the Warburg effect. And that is the same effect that was found by Otto Warburg. I don't know what's like 100 years ago, 80 years ago. Yep. I forget the timing. I should know this, so I should read up on it again. But he found that cancer cells actually exhibit this effect. Which
I was literally reading about this yesterday, so fascinating.
Oh, really? Read up about it? That's great. Yeah, so it basically means that cancer cells upregulate their consumption of glucose, and they don't use what they normally should be using, which is oxygen, to make energy from it. So normally a cell uses one glucose molecule and some oxygen, and it creates 36 units of energy, which is a lot. And with this effect, it can't do that anymore. It doesn't use the glucose. It doesn't use the oxygen. It does use the glucose on its own. In fermentation is what it's called. And then it only makes 2 units of energy. And this is very obvious if you look at it in a PET scan, because you can see that it takes up glucose like nothing else. It's so fast. Because, of course, if you just make 1/18 the amount of energy that you make in one cycle, then you have to upregulate the cycle 18 times. The thing is that in the Warburg effect, growth is coupled to energy production. So you don't just make energy 18 times as fast, you also grow 18 times as fast. Now that's where the problem occurs, because then you get a tumor, or in the case of PKD, a cyst. It's very interesting that it doesn't become a tumor, but there is probably a toxic reason for that, because the body needs to store away some toxins, which might be too much for today's episode. But in any case,
that's the oxalate key, right? Isn't it? Anyway, yes.
That's the what?
That's the link to the oxalate potential.
The oxalate. Oh well, maybe you know more in that case than I do. So the oxalate angle is, as far as I understand it, is that we get these little tiny oxalate crystals in the kidney, which then cause microscopic injury. And then these injured cells are more likely to exhibit this Warburg effect, because they have this damage in the DNA.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we know that there's a Warburg effect, there is a completely different angle that we can use to address it. So in other types of kidney disease, this is not present, and this is very specific to PKD. We have the Warburg effect. It only works with glucose, and other body cells can work on a different type of energy, which is called ketones. Of course, probably a lot of your viewership are very aware. So if you run the rest of your body on ketones as a parallel source of energy, then, by chance, by diffusion, by some of the cells are going to get ketones instead of glucose. And the cells that are exhibiting the Warburg effect, if they get ketones, they have 2 options. They can either die, or they can revert back to a healthy state where they can produce energy in a normal way, because ketones can only be used with glucose, with oxygen. Ketones and oxygen make energy. You can't use ketones without oxygen. So in that case, there's no energy at all, and the cell has to die. And both are actually good in PKD, right? Because if the cell dies, it's just going to be removed, and then it can't grow anymore. And if it reverts back to being healthy, that's great as well, because it's also not going to grow more than it should be. Yeah, so that is what I discovered back in 2015, and I wrote a little paper about it. Of course, didn't publish it anywhere, but and then I opened my Facebook group and sort of tried to get other people aware of this type of information, because really there was nobody out there that was aware of this type of approach, and I had gotten results already. And then we went from there, opened up the group, and it was more and more people that started to implement it on their own. And right now we have about 6,000 members, and there's a big post up top where I collect the success stories that the people post to the group. So that's if somebody's listening to this and they're new and they're not sure, this Felix guy, he could be saying anything. Yeah, there's like tons of success stories, and you can verify them yourself. So this is real.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, I was writing an online course for our kidney community, and went down the rabbit hole of PKD and a thing on that, and exactly what you're saying. I found the same thing that you have, that You really want to burn ketone bodies, Warburg Effect, and then obviously the oxalates because of the injury. So you need to take all of the anti-nutrient stuff out. So really similar. And of course, other people have come along behind you and published papers and done that sort of thing. And I know everybody were wanting to know before we go further down this rabbit hole, how are your kidneys now? What's happening with your PKD?
Yeah, so I'm doing pretty good. So the GFR, that's the measure of the kidney function, right? It's been going up steady since I started this, and we're still in the 130s. So for most people, that's higher than they ever get. So at 16, I was at 116, and now it's in the 130s. So I'm still higher than at 16 years of age. So that's pretty cool. And I'm still waiting on my next MRI, which is probably going to be the end of March. So we'll stay tuned for that.
Very fascinating. And how have the community gone when they've implemented this? What sort of results are you finding when people start to put this into their life plan?
Yeah. Of course, it's already very individual, as with all disease or conditions. But I would say if people are diligent in implementing the Bulletproof diet and maybe some of the supplements that I recommend, which we can also get into if you want, you can expect, maybe a 10-20% increase in function within a year. So it's not like huge, but what we need is to stay there for the rest of your life, and then and you're good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's interesting, I was speaking to, I can't remember who I was speaking to, but I was speaking to a person whose brother-in-law was diagnosed with PKD, was told there's nothing you can do about it. His mother died from polycystic kidney disease when she was in her mid-40s, I think. So he trashed himself, all the stuff that we know you shouldn't do in kidney disease in general, let alone got PKD and glucose, so sugar, McDonald's, soft drink. And he's now waiting, and I think he's 33 and he's waiting for a kidney transplant. So that's a great way not to do it. But, to your point, the whole having a conversation and actually, and that's the big thing we do at Kidney Coach too, is to actually say kidney disease is reversible. The increase in EGFR does happen. And we're now even seeing it in things like PKD, which is genetic. Of course, people think you can't reverse genetic disorders and things like that. And we're like, that is actually not the case. Look at where your EGFR is sitting. So I know people want to know, walk us through what the Bulletproof ketogenic diet looks like. I think people generally understand a ketogenic diet, but walk us through what a typical daily intake would be, what vegetables and things are and aren't on the list. Talk to us about, really specific things that people would need to take out, put in, all of those sort of things.
Yeah, sure. So I can maybe just do an illustration of a standard type of day that I would do or that a client would do. And the thing that is very emblematic of the Bulletproof diet, which is something that I love about it as well, is a thing that I just finished here was my little Bulletproof coffee. So this guy, Dave Asprey, invented the whole Bulletproof diet, and with it also the Bulletproof coffee. And the cool thing about this is, of course, it's made from coffee beans that are tested for having low levels of mold. They also use like this special process where the beans are not fermented when they're standing in a pool of water, but they're fermented like in a flowing process with these tubes. So they don't even develop mold, which is pretty cool, and they've patented it. So use these beans, and then you put the coffee in a blender with about a tablespoon of butter and about a tablespoon of MCT oil. And MCT oil is, if you get the pure stuff, it's called caprylic acid, or C8 MCT oil. And the cool thing about it is that it is converted to ketones directly in the liver, even if you don't eat a ketogenic diet the rest of the day. So this is a hack even for people who are like not diligent. It's better than nothing. You can definitely add some MCT oil to every meal so you get a little ketone boost. But in the coffee, it gives you a lot of ketones extra. And the coffee, of course, with the butter will also increase your calories and your fat intake for the day, because we always want to shoot for a 1.5-ish ratio of fat to protein. So that means if you're having 100 grams of protein per day, you want 150 grams of fat per day. Something around that area will get us into the beginning levels of ketosis that is pretty sustainable. There's a lot of people who want to go higher than that, but at that point, we do get into some issues with just having enough protein. So that's why I tend to stick to that ratio. So the cool thing about this coffee is that it doesn't, in a traditional sense, break a fast, because there's many different things that we can look at for defining how do we break a fast. But for PKD, it's really important that we stay in ketosis, so we have ketones in the blood, in addition to the glucose. It's always going to be there, but it's going to be lower, and we don't increase insulin levels. And both of these are very important. And the third one, which goes a little further than that, is we don't want to trigger mTOR, which means, so mTOR is a messenger molecule in the body that is necessary for all types of growth, including muscle growth, but also tumor growth, cyst growth, any kind of growth. And we really want to target our activation of this to a smaller window of the day. On Bulletproof, we do like 6 to 8 hours of the day that we eat food, which is when we trigger all of these mechanisms. Yeah, and so that would begin at about 1 p.m. maybe. For somebody like me, I do it at 1 p.m., which is when I would have lunch, and lunch would always consist of one piece of red meat, usually lamb or beef, which is, for many people, it's going to be a surprise, because nephrologists tend to preferentially recommend white meats, and then even more than that, no meat at all, and going for vegetarian, vegan options, which we should also talk about some of the misconceptions around that. But yeah, so it's going to be centered around like maybe half of my protein needs in the first meal, and then half of my protein needs in the second meal. Usually from red meat. Has a lot of benefits because it also gives us actually bioavailable iron, which many kidney patients need dearly, and a lot of nutrition, very available amino acids to rebuild our body and our kidneys as well. Has been shown that that meat actually has a higher capacity, or only only animal protein has a capacity to grow the glomeruli in the nephrons. So the actual active filtering units of the kidney, they can grow. We don't grow new nephrons, so we don't grow new units of filtration in the kidney. At least that's what we are supposed to believe for now. You know, it can always change. It did change in the past. But we, like every single unit that's still there and functioning, we can grow its head and make it more efficient at filtering. So we can do that with the right protein intake. Of course, if the protein intake is too low, it's not going to happen, because other things in the body are going to be preferentially done. But yeah, we have a nice unit of protein. We add to this some of the green zone vegetables, which would be low oxalate, low phytic acid, and low xenoestrogens, low phytoestrogens. So there's all these different categories, but it would be something like broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, green beans, cabbage, stuff like that. Salads are usually great. Cucumber, carrots, all these things can be the basis of our meals, all going to be low carb. And then we add a lot of fat to it. So it could be like a stir fry, where we add like, 5 tablespoons of butter or tallow or something like that. And we have the vegetables soak up all the fat. That's just an amazing benefit of vegetables, is really their ability to absorb fat. So we don't have to like shovel it in with like spoons, right? So yeah, that's really a good hack. And it could be a soup, it could be a stir fry, it could be a roast. Could be any kind of hearty, standard type of meals that people usually like to eat, and we do that for lunch and for dinner, and that is usually the standard type of diet. Yeah,
right. And so, calorie wise, how many sort of calories? I guess because it's so high fat, how many calories would you sort of be getting a day with that?
Yeah. We usually say body weight in pounds times 14. So we really want to be very adequate. So there's no reason to limit calories. Quite the opposite. If in doubt, have more fat, because that's always going to be a benefit in ketones. And if you gain weight more easily than someone else, then maybe don't do that. But have to find your own Goldilocks spot. But in my experience, people tend to just level out wherever their body tends to be comfortable the most, which is important to know, because there's people who start on keto and then they're like fearful that they lose too much weight. But usually, you get to exactly a perfect BMI, and that's where you stay.
Yeah, no, that's definitely my experience with ketos as well. And so you have your coffee in the morning to break your fast, first meal at 8. So it sounds like you're doing an intermittent fasting window between 6 and 8 hours that you're eating. which I'm a big fan of, even not in PKD and in regular kidney. I'm a big fan of that. Do you find, there's a lot of stuff going around, with biohackers and influencers at the moment about the difference between intermittent fasting for men and women. I tend not to fall into that category too much myself, but do you notice there is something that people are going to ask that question of what is there a difference between what men and women should do, or when it comes to PKD, it's all the same?
Yeah, so we always have to, and this actually goes for men as well. We have to find the balance between we're just a walking kidney and trying to address that, and we also have hormones as humans. So I personally actually did too much keto and fasting at one point, which dropped even my testosterone. And of course, for women, it's much more sensible than that. So, and I didn't go into this, so it's good that you asked. So, in general, we do 1 day of carbohydrate refeed per day, per week. Sorry. So we have a carb refeed day every week. For example, you could do it on Sundays or Saturdays or whatever fits your schedule most. And then we also have 1 day a week where we have breakfast instead of the Bulletproof coffee. So, of course, the Bulletproof coffee in the traditional sense doesn't break the fast, but then 1 day a week we want to break the fast because we want to keep the body guessing and also provide some more nutrients at different times. And I do have some clients who prefer to time their carbohydrate days around ovulation. And then go lower on the carbs afterwards, so that when the egg is produced, that they have more carbs, and then afterwards they have less. I guess that's similar to what some of your clients do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We tend to find round ovulation, and some women as they bleed, fasting and long wind and things like it. But I do find, you probably find this as well, doing a ketogenic type diet long-term does seem to fix hormones, because hormones are made of fat, right? So once you get the fat right and you're getting good quality fats in there long enough, hormones generally, for I would say 75% of people will actually even kill themselves out on a ketogenic type diet. Been my experience. I don't know if that's what you see.
Yeah, I would say the sex hormones and thyroid are pretty stubborn if there's already an issue. I've read that people see that. However, I haven't seen it myself much. I usually need to somehow address sex hormones and thyroid if there's already like a mentionable dysfunction. And for me, just having the 1 carb day a week was enough to like get testosterone back in a good range. But it's very possible that if I ate a high carb diet, that my testosterone would be higher. I don't doubt that. But the question is that worth it? And probably it's not. And it might even be, you might even decide that for a condition that is more complicated, like PKD, that you would rather have some exogenous hormones than more carbs because you just want to live longer.
Yeah, it all comes down to really individualizing and tailoring things, which is, when you get into the nitty-gritty of things. And apart from the coffee, what else are people consuming as far as beverages and drinks during the day?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly water, just filtered water. And we want to sort of, you probably do this as well, hit the Goldilocks zone of like having like slightly yellow urine, not too much, not too little water. And people need to usually get accustomed to taking in a lot more salt because, we're all being told by nephrologists to limit salt. And so many people, especially on keto, are actually low sodium and low chloride in their blood tests, which is amazing, right?
Yeah, Jess and I actually just did a podcast on this, that
right.
There is some people with the salt gene for sure. And when the blood pressure won't move with a whole pile of blood pressure medications, and sometimes for those people you take salt out and absolutely blood pressure will get fixed. But I would agree with you, that is an exception, not a rule. I find in a lot of kidney disease patients, they are too low a salt, and that actually bumps up their potassium, and then everyone's told to get potassium, and actually potassium, you'll get false negatives if sodium's too low. For sure, we see that all the time because everyone's on these crazy low potassium diets, and then when you dump potassium, your sodium goes down the toilet as well. People are fatigued, their hair's falling out, they're getting heart fluctuations and all sorts of other sorts of things, and it's often either too low sodium and too low potassium, or the potassium's gone up because the sodium is too low. Like, it really does some crazy things, right? So
yeah,
the nephrology world has not got that one right. Jess and I have a bugbear about that stuff too.
Wow.
So
yeah. Yeah, even for somebody who has the salt gene, ketogenic diet, just like it flushes like 4 times more salt out through the urine. So even those people, they might not even have to restrict it. They just, if they go on keto, they could probably keep going with the same amount of salt just because they lose so much more through the urine. And if people start on keto, it's so common for them to report this keto flu.
Yes.
I've never had it, even when I started, because I always loved salt and I was never restricting it. So I just listened to my taste buds, and then as my salt taste, which was already high, increased more on keto, I just had more, which I never had any issues with. But there's so many people who forbid themselves more salt. And even if their blood results are low, right? Just because nobody talks to them about it. And you need to have the salt, especially if you feel like tired and weak on the ketogenic diet. That's it. And yeah, that's it.
And so do you find, because I actually have never heard that before, the keto flu is generally due to low salt?
Yes, it is. Sodium deficiency.
There you go. I had never heard that. I just know that, 9 times out of 10 people, and I'm same like you. I am ketogenic all the time, even though I'm super lean. I do it for a neurodegenerative disease, but and it's, I don't know if you find this, but I've been doing it for so long, 10 plus years now. My body just has decided that ketones are the way to go. And even if I'm having a carb day or something like that, I will still produce a huge amount of ketones because my body's just like,
really?
Yeah, that's now. Yeah, we've forgotten about glucose and what glucose even is.
Wow. That's great. I'm envious.
Well, yeah, I think I have some weird genetics in there, but my body definitely has a preference for ketone bodies. Wow. It's probably been lean my whole life. So, but I'm a love fat, so that fits me anyway. So,
but you don't do many carb days then?
No, I don't do. It's interesting. I probably do a carb day if I'm out and I just can't get it out of eating a certain way, which might be once a month or something like that.
Yeah,
so
it's more.
Maybe
it's not an occurrence that's very regular.
Yeah, no, and it's never tanked my hormones or done anything like that. People wonder why I have an abundance of energy, and I'm like, well, I'm getting 4 units of energy for every piece of food that I eat generally versus the one that. So that's why.
Yeah. Wow. So when we're talking about deficiency, right? We're talking about sodium deficiency. So one other very common thing, which is horrible, is protein deficiency, which is funny because, it's both of these are actually doctor produced. Both of these actually what doctors keep telling people. And I've recently had a client who, and she's very new in my program, and she has tried like many different diets, and she's like very meticulous with the different things that she tried, and you can just see in her, and she made this graph and everything. So she's very tuned in, right?
Yeah, right.
And you can just see that she's tried vegan, vegetarian, then she did like vegetarian keto. She tried with soy, without soy. Then she did Bulletproof, and then she did carnivore. And you can just see the GFR is not budging. It's like going down, 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 down. It's always the same. It's not even changing, right? Something could have got worse or better, but it's just always the same. And like this is over 10 years, right?
Yeah, right.
And I was looking at this and thinking, okay, so she didn't touch the factor that is doing this yet, because otherwise we would have seen a change in the trend. So what could it be? And then I looked deeper into like her food diary and what she was telling me. And she had like for 10 years, she's been protein deficient. And we have seen studies where they do like the prescribed protein restriction to like whatever, 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. It's ridiculously low.
Wow. Yeah. We'd only if we're doing that end stage, then we're putting in like keto analogs to just
exactly. And that's
like,
a study that
with keto analogs. Holy cow. But
that's a study that I'm talking about, right? So in that one, I think they followed him for like 3 years, and one of them had the 0.3 grams, so the very restricted protein, and the other one, exactly, and the other group added on keto analogs of essential amino acids, which for listeners who don't know is basically a replacement for protein that's a lot less of a burden. I don't like the word, but people know what it means on the kidney. It's very inaccurate to say it that way, but still.
Yeah.
So one of them had very low protein, and the other one had the same low protein, but plus a supplement that mimics protein, right? And this supplemented group almost didn't lose any kidney function over the 3 years, like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 points.
Study. Yep.
And the other one is like 10 points lower, 12 points. Horrible. So, and this is exactly what I thought of when I saw her results. I said, you've been protein restricting forever, and your kidney is just has no resources to rebuild. You can't do it. So I think that's what she's seeing, and of course now we're changing that, and she's very apprehensive about adding more protein because she's been told that it's not a good idea. But yeah, I guess that she was lured into this trap, quote unquote, as many people are, which is, and I coined this term. It's called the lightning bolt effect. So if you see the GFR going down and then you limit protein, then it goes up within an instant. And then it goes down again at the same rate. So you see this lightning bolt pattern if you graph out the GFR over time, or the creatinine over time, then it's an inverse. But it just means that you haven't changed kidney function at all. You just reduced the input of protein, which then results in lower creatinine levels, which mimics higher kidney function. But you're just putting in less, having the same function, and then you have less resources to rebuild the kidney, and you're putting yourself in a very difficult position, because at some point you can't have the protein anymore because you're unable to excrete the waste products from it.
So interesting that you talk about this, because it's just so for anyone that doesn't know who I'm talking about, Jessiana Seville, who does lots of podcasting with me, is the one who introduced me to Felix, and her and I have had so many discussions on exactly this, because obviously you, for anyone listening that doesn't know, you build new tissue out of protein. You need amino acids, they're the building block of life. So when you limit protein, and in general kidney disease, it can be useful for really end stage for that lightning bolt effect. We might use it if we're trying to spare someone on dialysis before transplant. You can use it really short term with keto analogs, but we would never use it more than 4 to 6 weeks maximum to, and you only do it if you're sparing someone transplant. That's the only time we would ever really, and we're never taking it down to the levels that you're talking about, ever would I take them that low. So it's really, really interesting. And to your point, you can't build new tissue and regenerate kidneys without protein. You need amino acids. Like that's science 101. So it is an interesting technique, where in renal diets, we are taking out protein, we're taking out then amino acids that build that, we're taking out sodium, we're taking out phosphorus. We know the new studies say, potassium, that if you take out potassium, you actually accelerate end-stage kidney disease. Lots of studies coming out and saying that now. So, I'm a big believer that renal diets are just so far off the mark of what they need to be when it comes to supporting healthy kidney disease. So it's good to hear that you're getting some really good results. Now, tell me, supplement, is there anything else about the diet before I turn you 90 degrees and ask about what supplements you are pairing this diet along with?
No, let's talk about supplements. Sure.
So what are you seeing? Because, I'm really always fascinated by the mTOR pathway. So when I'm doing supplements with PKD patients, they are very much targeted mTOR pathway. There's like berberines and things like that. So, what about you? What are you seeing works really well in PKD? Like, what are your go-tos? Like, if anyone's got PKD, these are the things they should be thinking about.
Yeah. So just from the research, there are the three musketeers, which is quercetin is number one. Very easy to get, very affordable, and also very good for basically everything that we've ever had as humans. So
I'd agree with that.
Probably everybody should be taking it. And dosage, we start at 1 gram per day, but the absorption is not great for the standard type of powder. So you can go higher than that, and if you get powder, that's really easy to do. So but there's some concern at very high doses. So I tend to go like between 1 and 3 grams per day of the standard stuff. Or if you get liposomal, then you can take like 500 milligrams or maybe a gram. And quercetin has been just shown independently in rat studies, because that's all we have. to just lower the rate of cyst growth in PKD. So there's all the reasons in the world to take it.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, there is a synergistic effect between curcumin and ginkgo biloba, which
Yes.
is
Lots of
also,
studies done on that one.
yeah, very common supplements. Ginkgo biloba is very easy to get, and you can absorb it just as a standard extract, you know, the 240 milligrams per day in the feeding window because it does activate mTOR. And the curcumin is a bit more particular because there's a lot of products out there that use black pepper as an absorption enhancer, which is not great in PKD because it opens up the tight junctions. So in the gut lining gets more leaky, and it does let through some more of the curcumin, but it also lets through some more of the bacterial waste products and other toxins that might also exacerbate PKD. So we don't want to risk that. But luckily enough, there's other methods to make it more absorbable. There's the Longvita curcumin, which is just micronized, so they just make the molecule very small. And then there's even like the third generation curcumin products that have come out recently that have like 95 times absorption. So I tend to recommend either of those because we don't want like chemical absorption enhancers. Like sometimes you can see in the ingredients is like polysorbate 80 or something like that, which is
Yes. Yeah.
also doing the same thing. It is also opening up the gut lining. So we don't want that. We want it to go through some other way because it's actually absorbing better itself and not because it's opening up the holes in the gut lining. So yeah, curcumin, you can get a very absorbable form like 500 milligrams in the fasting window, and then ginkgo like 240 milligrams in the feeding window. Those are like the very easy staples. And for the curcumin, I know that it can be quite expensive depending on which product you choose. And I did a video in my student days that's still on YouTube for making your own very absorbable curcumin product capsules. It's on YouTube, so if you just enter like a curcumin black sludge recipe, then you'll find it. And it's called that because these little orange particles, they dissolve so great in this stuff that it becomes black. So it's so concentrated. So that's what I tend to use for curcumin, just because it's yeah, cheap, and it's not that hard to make once you get the gist of it.
Yeah, right. Do you ever worry about quercetin with people like with comp genes? Because I do find sometimes my really patients that have, you know, homozygous comp genes really struggle with quercetin. Is that something that you see as well, or because the benefits outweigh that sort of stuff, you don't worry about it so much?
Yeah, it's a messy science. It's just with the fasting and just like with the fasting and the ketones, you're very correct that there might be people who can't do it, and it's not, you know, if they're really struggling with it, I wouldn't put them on it.
Yeah,
we have other things in that case. We don't necessarily need to do it, but as long as you don't have any side effects, then it's just a very great go-to.
yeah. And for anyone that doesn't know the studies behind, you know, when I've looked at them, they are there's plenty of studies behind those three when it comes to PKD, mTOR pathways, all those sort of things. And you're right, the synergy between ginkgo and turmeric, specifically in PKD, they did all the studies in that were really, really good. So
yeah. And then there's so this is going way too deep for the short podcast, but there's a whole other angle to PKD, which is asking like, why does it start when it starts, right? There's like people don't have any cysts when they're like 12, and now at 13 they start getting cysts, which is similar to what happened to me. So we always have to ask, why is it that point in time? Why does it begin? What happens? And it's the same in cancer, you know? We know this Warburg effect is there, but why does it begin? And Warburg didn't answer that. And Siegfried, who's now developing all the amazing, very, very effective cancer therapies based on this this theory, also doesn't answer this question. But there is a guy who does. His name is Mark Lintern, and I'm going to have him on the podcast in a couple of weeks, so that'll be interesting. And he's saying it's a fungus, actually, that enters the cell, and the cell has to switch on the cell danger response, which means there's fungus inside the cell. It's an invader, and the immune system can't fix it. So what does the cell do? It switches off its use of oxygen for energy production, and it starts using the oxygen to make free radicals to oxidize the fungus. As soon as the fungus is gone, the Warburg effect is also switched off. And it's very possible that we are looking at the same mechanism in PKD. I think the cell danger response is activated in PKD. And the question is, what is the substance that triggers it? But I think because there are studies in germ-free mice that show that mice that have PKD similar genes and don't have gut flora don't get cysts, these studies show that it's a gut-derived toxin. So that is a whole new area, which I've
not seen this research. That is fascinating.
And it's from the 80s, and people are not following up on it. You can even take the cyst. You can even take the cyst fluid from PKD kidney, you put it in a petri dish, and it grows a cyst without the gene.
Fascinating. I mean, I'm a very logical person, so what you've said just makes a lot of sense to me. We know the microbiome is like responsible for so many things, and if you've got, hence why taking out things like mycotoxins from coffee and anti-nutrients and all of those things sort of probably become the tweaker of a ketogenic diet, of why it's been so effective, especially in your case with, you know, total shrinkage of cysts and things like that. I don't think I've seen anyone else have a halt in reduction like that. I've definitely seen PKD grind in its tracks and EGFR stabilize and maybe go up, but I haven't seen anyone with that big reduction in cysts. But in fairness, I haven't been, like, we do ketogenic. We don't do all the and we take oxalates out. But then when you start to take some of these other guys out, which are probably fungal feeding foods.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and because we know when you change the diet, the entire microbiome will change behind it. So then you go, in your case, you're changing microbiome that came behind the diet, and you're starting at 12, and then everything you're talking about, you're like, how is that all linked? Like, it's a really good question to ask.
Yeah, and we don't know. We don't know that there could be very, very interesting studies done in the future, but they're not right now, and I hope I can get somebody to do them. For example, there was a population sequencing study where they did, like, I don't know, like 10,000 people sequencing, looked for PKD genes, and they found them in 20 people. Although the ultrasound statistic would say it's 10%, it's 10 people in 10,000. So twice as many people have the gene as we would assume from general ultrasound statistics. I think the penetrance of the PKD genes might not be 100%. Which is thought in the current science. Everybody thinks if you have the gene, 100%, you're going to get the cyst. I think that might not be the case. I don't know. But if we ever find that, like, for example, they could just call up these 20 people. They could just ask them, get an ultrasound. Do all of you have cysts? If the answer is no, these people who don't have the cysts, we need to get fecal transplants from these guys.
100%, because there's something protective in there.
Yeah, or maybe something is missing that's making toxin.
Yeah. I mean, geez, we always, as naturopaths 101, you know, we've been saying it for, like, I don't know, 200 years, as long as naturopathy's been around, that all disease starts in the gut. It's like our hallmark thing, what we say for everything. And, you know, even with genetic disease, then you're coming back. And, you know what I mean?
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's crazy, because you would go, well, okay, genes, maybe they don't fall into that category. But no, I'm listening to you and I'm going, well, actually, it's actually may be switched on and off. And it's interesting because we do know that some babies, you can see the PKD in when they're, you know, being born. In utero, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. And so, you know, has then the mother got something that's been crossed to the child, across the placenta and microbiome, and I mean, Felix, that's super fascinating. What an amazing and interesting area of research to go into.
Yeah, and it would be, I mean, knowing what's inside the cyst fluid of these newborns. Of course, we can't do it ethically, but that would be very interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. This, I mean, it's it's exciting in the fact that if we can get people to do the research and go down there, that they're potentially, and with AI and all these things that I'm seeing coming down the pipeline and speeding up, we potentially will see things like cures to PKD, I suspect, in 10 years or so.
Yeah.
If people start to do this research, and we know there's a lot of research and money being put into microbiome sequencing. They're doing a lot of work in rheumatoid arthritis now with it, where they think they can reverse using microbiome. So, yeah, it's a really interesting area, but I had never heard that link between PKD. So,
yeah. And if you think about it, if you think it through to the end, then the holy grail that they're looking for in science, which is the off switch for cyst production, might actually be a horrible idea. Because if the cysts are actually not the body making a mistake, but the body protecting itself from a high toxic burden, then if you just rob it of the ability to sort of store this stuff away in a bag, then you might just get like festering weird toxins in like interstitial space, like somewhere where it doesn't belong, because the cells just can't keep it out. This is because of the mutation. They're just not as tight, and toxins get into places where they shouldn't be getting. It's just like having a leaky pipe under the sink, right? And it's better than nothing to be able to put the leaky stuff that's leaked through the pipe and that's now under your sink into a little bag and close it up so it doesn't fester. So that if they ever find this holy grail, it might actually turn out to be the wrong thing to look for.
Well, and it comes back to that the body is far more sophisticated and intelligent than we are. So when we try and outsmart the body, you're right. Like I always believe bodies aren't, I've got an autoimmune disease, and I always have to say my body isn't out to get me. It's not attacking tissue because it hates me. It's doing it. And I do believe viral microbes are a big driver of most autoimmune diseases, which is sort of theory. So yeah, super interesting, really poignant question to put out into the world with that sort of stuff. We kind of need to make sure you're looking over the research with that, don't we?
Yeah, definitely.
And having thoughts around that. Fascinating. Okay. What else do you want to add about, and look, I feel like I could have you back for so many great big philosophical discussions and really interesting areas on PKD, but as a nice overview for people listening, I feel like we've got, we know it's a ketogenic diet. We've got a nice sample of the day. We are definitely taking out the anti-nutrients. We're looking at oxalates, doing all of those sort of things. You're having a carbohydrate refeeding day, maybe once a week, and switching around breakfast. So the body is, not always in anticipate or, isn't in set and forget mode when it comes to all sorts of stuff. We've got the 3 major nutrients that you get good results with being quercetin, curcumin, and ginkgo biloba. What else do you feel are the must takeaways when someone's diagnosed with PKD that they can go away with and go, okay, I've got a basis to be able to think about taking the reins on this disease for myself?
Yeah. As you probably also do with clients, we need to make sure that urine pH is in range. Just because if your pH is not good, if your body is too acidic or even too alkaline for that matter, but most people aren't, then cells are not going to work in their optimal capacity. You can imagine it's just like a factory, right, for the listeners. If the factory thermostat is too high or too low, people are not going to do their best work. So we need to make sure that the body is not robbing itself of its own minerals from bone and teeth to like alkalize the blood. Instead, we want to alkalize the blood through our nutrition, and we can check if we're doing that by measuring second morning urine. We can just get a cheap aquarium digital pH meter. I like those better than the pH strips, although they have to be calibrated like once a month. But you can just keep the calibration solution in the fridge for a while, for a year or so. Yeah, and then you measure second morning urine. So in the morning, you go to the toilet, and then you just drink water, nothing else, because you want to measure what happens to pure water when it becomes urine. So you measure the second morning urine, and you want it to be between 6.5 and 7, which is the optimal range, which shows us that we don't have to buffer much of the acidity through like dissolving bone or teeth or something like that. So that is one very important aspect, because I hear this so much from people that even that are like clients, even like after 3 months on the program, they still tell me they can't get into the pH zone. And even though I tell them, you know, if you don't get there, you just have to take more alkalizing supplements like magnesium citrate, potassium citrate, if you can do it like from the blood levels. Sodium bicarbonate, if you know, it's all very individual. If your minerals are high, of course, you have to look at which ones you can do, but you can even do like apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, more vegetables. All these things get up the alkalinity. And of course, if you are too alkaline, then you can just like ease up on some of those. And then if you have that in range, then I guess the final thing that can help or hurt if done the right or the incorrect way is exercise. So people are sometimes told that they should just like not exercise at all or just like walk. And of course, yeah, I say like, of course, I don't want you to get into the boxing match and get hit in the sides, right? That's probably not a good idea if you have PKD, right? But you can do strength training on machines. This isn't like the cyst is not going to pop because you're doing some strength training. You know, it's not going to happen. And in that, we want to stay so we want to stay very low pulse. And there's the so-called MAF heart rate trainings named after Phil Maffetone. It's actually for runners initially, because they also found out that they are much more efficient, especially long-term marathon runners. It's not for sprinters so much. If they stay in a ketogenic range, right? If their blood ketones stay high and glucose stays normal. And if you go very hard in the gym, if you run for very fast, very long, then usually your pulse will go like in the 160 or whatever range, which is too high for your body to keep metabolizing ketones. So we are going into that Warburg Effect type metabolism in the muscle. And of course, you're sending a body-wide signal to do that. And we don't want to do that. So we want to keep our pulse below the standard formula is like 180 minus your age. So if you're 40 years old, you don't want to be over 140 BPM pulse, or, you know, the lower the better. And that is very easy to do if you do strength training. I actually have a video on my YouTube that everybody can look at if they want, just for like a standard, easy strength training routine at 5 machines in the gym. And it has very long rest periods because we want the mitochondria that make the energy to be able to recharge the body without getting into this stage where they have to make energy very fast, which is the Warburg effect, or at least similar to that molecularly. It's not called that. Yeah, and if we do that, then we send the signal that we are building muscle, and that means that we need to remove some damaged proteins from other parts of the body if we are in fasting. So people should be doing fasted, high-intensity exercise at a low pulse rate. You can even do running if you want. You can do it multiple times per week if you want. But if you stay below this pulse rate in the beginning, it's not going to be much of a run. It's more going to be a slow jog, maybe a walk even. But you get a lot faster the more often you do it. So, and that is really, it's been shown that people who are very metabolically fit, they measure this VO2 max is what it's called. It's like, it's a measure of metabolic fitness. And you raise it with this, right? If you are very metabolically fit, then 2 hours of fasting gets you where 48 hours of fasting gets somebody that's not metabolically fit. So that is really the optimal zone to be, because if you fast for 17 hours and you are fit, then you are going to reduce a lot of cyst tissue theoretically, because you're sending the signal, we need to have some protein from somewhere, and you're not eating it. So it has to be coming from damaged proteins, which is cysts.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's fascinating. So, and that totally makes sense. Again, I do it for other reasons, as you mentioned, to mop up senescent cells and waste, things like that. But it absolutely, I thought about using it in PKD, but it makes absolute sense. So yeah, right. Some really good, key, solid things that people can go away. And what I love about all of this is, I know some people struggle with diet, but generally people really serious about their kidney disease are already down the rabbit hole of diets and taking generally out the wrong things and that sort of stuff. So really overall, the system isn't really hard. It's not like you're standing on your head and jumping up and down, counting to 40 every time the full moon is in Aquarius with the North Node. You know what I mean? So
We're not doing that.
No, and it's doable. I think, too, when you're looking down the barrel and, PKD, what most people are told is you tool along until you need to have dialysis and then have a transplant, and you'll have a transplant and then off you go and go back to a terrible lifestyle. And I'm just
the wait and see mentality.
Yeah. Whereas there is a lot of stuff that you can do and implement. And I mean, I'm really be very fascinated to see how your next MRI goes and what's happening with your kidneys.
Same.
Yeah, you'll have to let us know. So you've mentioned your Facebook group. Tell everybody, how can they find you? And if they want to work with you one-on-one, where will you be hiding on the interweb and in space?
Yes. So I'm at reversingpkd.com. Very simple link. And the Facebook group is actually linked there under community. I also have my Instagram linked, which has a lot of meal pictures if you need some inspiration for that. And that is really the hub of where everything happens, reversingpkd.com.
And if you want a really great book, Jessie was she was showing me your book. So Reversing Polycystic Kidney Disease on Amazon. Can you get it anywhere and off your website as well?
Yes. And we also have the audiobook now, which is also on Amazon and also everywhere else.
Woohoo! And I will put links in the show notes below for anyone that wants to do that. And we'll send a email out to our community so people that are interested can find Felix and decide if they want to do some one-on-one work with you, or whether they want to buy the book and dig in that way. Some really interesting things that I had not heard of or thought about before, especially when it comes to PKD and the possible effect of a fungus, and some training. I hadn't thought about that with PKD. Some really other interesting things there that I am definitely going to take away and utilize with some of my more stubborn PKD patients. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'd love to have you back on this. Like I say, I can see all these rabbit holes that I'd love to take you down that we've managed not to fall down. But I think there's some good Alice in Wonderland fall down rabbit hole moments here that we could dig up for some podcasts in the future.
True.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And it's always it's different when someone's had the condition themselves and then really have gone and done an N of one study and found what's really worked and taken that out there and, found the studies that back up your hunch. I think when you're living in a body, you cannot out-doctor your own personal experience. I don't care what anyone says to me. The greatest professional is someone living with a disease that has a hunger to really make a dent on it. So I thank you for sharing your wisdom and your N of one study on yourself and taking that out to the world. It's a noble thing to do. And I'm sure you're, I'm not sure. I know you're helping thousands and thousands of people. And hopefully with this podcast, we can get the word out to even more.
Yes, that's amazing. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast.
And we'll have you back for sure. So again, I'll put all the links below so you can stalk Felix and ask him questions and look at his Facebook group. And if you want to know more about what we do, head to www.kidneycoach.com. You'll find us on socials with the same handles. And make sure you hit subscribe and like. That way you will get notified anytime we put up new content. And if you have questions for Felix or about this podcast, please put them in the comments. I can always reach out to him. And if there's some really good topics or rabbit holes that you would like me to get Felix back on the podcast and ask him, please write that in the comment and I will be sure to do that as well. Thank you for being part of our community. And Felix, thank you again for your time, your wisdom, and your generosity. Look forward to seeing you next time.